Twitter and Facebook have labelled a post by President Trump as misleading after he claimed that postal ballots in the key swing state of Pennsylvania could lead to rampant fraud and street violence. Mr. Trump alleged without evidence that a Supreme Court decision allowing mail-in ballots in the state to be counted 3 days after the election was dangerous and undermined the rule of law. The platform also added a link inviting people to learn that mail-in ballots are safe. Let's talk now to Tristan Hotham from the University of Bath here in the UK. He's a social media analyst. Did Twitter do the right thing in this case?
I think they're doing the right thing. They're trying to strike a balance, which is allowing for Trump to say these quite dangerous things, but also not completely censor him. And given it looks like we could well see a very close election, it's important that I think they strike this balance now effectively, because we could have a week of protracted legal wranglings and debate about actually where the vote is going. So we need to get this right now.
Mr. Trump's tweet is obviously an easy one to spot. There are millions of others. How big an operation is it for Twitter, for Facebook, for other platforms to keep across that kind of content and to then take it down or censor it?
Obviously, it's an absolute huge mess, essentially. But this is also, one of the good things about social media is that we all have our opportunity to chime in on election day. But with the flip side of that, we are going to see people, if the result is close, you're going to have groups saying that Trump is winning or Biden is winning, jumping the gun before we actually know the full picture. And there's not really too much we can do unless we're going to mass censor the entire internet. So unfortunately, it's just something we're going to have to get the mainstream traditional media and those in power to try and agree on a sensible way forwards where we're going to hear from both sides, but also limit any of this misinformation getting out.
As is always the way, Tristan, they'll be criticised whatever they do. Who within Twitter is actually ultimately making these decisions?
Well, I think it's Jack at the top, and essentially it's bowing to pressure, both from an economic perspective, but also from a political perspective. They're really trying their best to steer through what is essentially the choppiest waters you could ever possibly wish upon your worst enemy. And so they really are just trying to do their best. And at the moment, I think they're doing the right thing, trying to be a bit cautious, but also limit the harms from Trump's tweets. But also going forwards, it's entirely possible that Trump will win, at which point we're going to have a real debate about where we're going to go with all of this.
What about the role of social media when it comes to mobilising groups? We've just been speaking to our correspondent in the US who talks of these cities that are boarded up, the real fear there is in America that there'll be violence on the streets. What role does social media play, and how can those kind of tweets be moderated or stopped, and should they be?
Obviously, social media gives us all the ability to suddenly organise very quickly in a way that never existed before. If we had a contested election, back in 1840, it would be, organised and debated within probably closed doors by a group of elites. Now this debate about a contested election is going to happen across millions of conversations across the United States. And so we have a very different dynamic, a more dangerous dynamic, but also one that is more democratic, arguably. Now, I think that when it comes to the boarding up of these buildings, it's probably more to do with just being ultra careful. I think that if we see protests on the street, we can't go, that's not allowed. That's a key part of democracy, allowing people to protest. And unfortunately, we're in a very divided time where we see radical left and radical right lock heads, essentially.
Yeah, we are indeed. Tristan, thank you so much for joining us.